Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here, and today I'm going over a brand new commander out of the spoilers for Final Fantasy. Very interesting new mono red commander with Zell. I want to say it's Dincht, could be Dinkt, I don't really know. I'm just going to call him Zell. 2 in a red for a 0/3 human monk. He says you may play an additional land on each of your turns. He gets +1/+0 for each land you control, and at the beginning of your end step, you return a land you control to its owner's hand. So it seems pretty obvious what you want to be doing with this commander. It's going to be mono red landfall, but I figured I'd make a video on this deck because I found some things that I didn't immediately think of right when I saw this commander. I thought it would be pretty interesting to take the deck in those directions. I'd also like to give a special thank you to my patrons for supporting the channel. If you'd also like to support the channel while getting some perks like personalized deck techs, go ahead and click that link down below. But since we're doing landfall, I figured I'd go over the lands here first. The most important one in this deck is going to be Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle. It's a land, enters the battlefield tapped. It says whenever a mountain enters the battlefield under your control, if you control at least 5 other mountains, you may have Valakut, the Molten Pinnacle, deal 3 damage to any target. It also taps for red mana. Now this is going to be one of the primary win cons in this deck, just burning your opponents for face damage. In order to make sure we get as many landfall triggers as we need, I threw in about like 40 mountains or so. I have about 50 lands in this deck, and since Valakut is one of the more important pieces, I threw in cards to go get that, like Urza's Cave. It's a land, taps for colorless, pay 3, tap it, sack it, search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. But say we already have our Valakut and we draw our Urza's Cave, it's actually still worth it to crack it and go get some of our other important lands like Terrain Generator, taps for colorless, pay 2, tap it. You may put a basic land from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. So this is just ramp on a land. I mean, it costs 3 mana if you include itself, but in a deck like this with so many landfall payoffs that I'll go over a little bit later, obviously including the Valakut, but I have other similar lands like Terrain Generator, such as Horizon of Progress. The important part of this one is you pay 3, tap it, and you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. This one's slightly better, slightly worse, depends how you look at it, than the Terrain Generator, because this lets you put any land as opposed to just basic lands on the field. So if you happen to have non-basic lands in your hand, which I don't have that many, I'm maybe like 10 or so, you still are able to ramp those out if you need to. But now I'll go over some of the landfall payoffs here. There's so many different styles of payoffs in this deck. We have direct damage ones similar to the Valakut, like Tunneling GOP, 2 in a red for a 3/2 insect, has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. There's several effects like that in red. I have them all in the deck. I won't go over them here. Next up, I have Dragon Master Outcast, single red for a 1/1 human shaman. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 6 or more lands, you create a 5/5 red dragon creature token with flying. Seeing as how it's probably going to be pretty easy to get up to those 6 lands in this deck, pumping out a bunch of 5/5 flyers to either protect us or help with attacking, definitely going to be worth it in this deck. Also threw in cards like Cleansing Wildfire, 1 in a red for a sorcery. It says destroy target land. Its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle their library, and then you draw a card so it loots. Normally you'd use this style of a card on your opponent to get rid of like a problematic land that's not basic, obviously, but in this deck we're going to actually be using it on ourselves, letting us get another landfall trigger while also drawing us another card. There's obviously several cards in the deck like that. Then I also threw in cards like Claws of Valakut, 1 red for an enchantment, or it says enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+0 for each mountain you control and has first strike. Seeing as how this is a very similar ability to what our commander already has, it's basically going to be doubling up his power as long as all the lands we control are mountains, which most of them will be, not all of them obviously, but it's going to give a significant bump to your commander, and that's going to enable our other win con in the deck, which is like flinging your commander with cards like Kazul's Fury, 2 in a red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast this spell, you sacrifice a creature, and it says Kazul's Fury deals damage equal to the sacrificed creature's power to any target. Also is an MDFC, so it has a land on the back. Most of the time you're not going to use that, but if you need to in a pinch, you can. Since our commander already has basically like a Blackblade Reforged built into it, just spamming out as many lands as we can, growing our commander's power, and then flinging it at our opponents, that's definitely a strong way to be able to finish out the game. Kind of in the same vein, I have Fiend Lash, 1 in a red for an equipment. Equipped creature has +2/+0 and has reach. It says whenever equipped creature is dealt damage, it deals damage equal to its power to target player or planeswalker. So this one's really good if you want to be swinging in with your commander. Obviously, once it has that, 7, 8, 9, 10 power, however many lands you have, if you're swinging in and your opponents are saying, well, hey, I'm going to block this, well, it doesn't really matter if you block it. I'm going to be dealing the damage to you either way. And if you happen to give your commander trample, then you could do, even more damage, whether they block it or not. I also threw in Soul's Fire, 2 in a red for an instant. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to any target. So similar to the Fling, but fortunately, you don't have to sacrifice your commander in order to do this. So you can Soul's Fire into Fling and probably kill 2 opponents at that rate. And maybe a little later in the game, once all of your, landfall triggers have already died and board wipes or whatever, targeted removal, I threw in cards like Seismic Assault for another way to deal damage to our opponents. It's triple red for an enchantment. Discard a land card. Seismic Assault deals 2 damage to any target. Since we're playing so many lands, this is definitely a way we can end up finishing out the game a little bit later, or possibly even earlier in the game if we just happen to be drawing a ton of lands, even more that we can be playing per turn. You just pitch them to the grave and shoot anything you want. You can kill creatures with this or just go straight face. Next up, just a couple of cards to talk about in the ramp category. Walking Atlas up first, 2 mana artifact, 1/1 construct, says tap. You may put a land card from your hand onto onto the battlefield. This one's pretty good because it doesn't only count basics. So if you say you have your Valakut or whatever, tap the Walking Atlas and then you could put it onto the battlefield. That's basically what we're going to be prioritizing in this deck, just ways to get more lands onto the battlefield as opposed to like the normal mana rocks that you'd use in mono red. Even if they're a little bit high costed, it's definitely worth it with all the payoffs that we have in this deck. And one way to do that being Scare Tiller, 4 mana, 1/4 artifact creature Scarecrow. When it becomes tapped, you choose one, put a land card onto the battlefield tapped from your hand, or you can return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So if you use that Urza's Cave to go find your Valakut, get it back with your Scare Tiller and go get that terrain generator or whichever other land that you'd like to get, Myriad Landscape, whatever it may be. Also threw in Girapur Orrery, 4 mana artifact. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns, and it says at the beginning of each player's upkeep, if that player has no cards in hand, that player draws 3 cards. So this one does actually help out our opponents, but we're definitely going to be taking more advantage of that than our opponents will because we're always going to have lands in our hand. We're not typically going to be empty-handed in this deck, but if we happen to be, seeing as how we're playing a lot of our lands, extra ones per turn with our commander and with the Girapur, it's possible that we actually run out of cards in hand and then be able to draw the 3 off the Girapur. Either way, just playing it for the additional land is good enough. Lastly here, Canoptek Wraith, 3 mana for a 2/1 artifact creature Wraith. It says it can't be blocked, and when Canoptek Wraith deals combat damage to a player, you may pay 3 and sacrifice it. If you do, search your library for up to 2 basic lands with the same name as the land you control and put them on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. So this is kind of like a similar version to Burnished Heart, which I also have in the deck, but this is just another version, especially because it can't be blocked, so you're also getting in for the 2 damage, so it kind of is a little bit better than the Burnished Heart because it's guaranteed to get in for that damage. Lastly, the utility category here, just some cards that don't really fit into some of the other categories. I threw in Chandra's Ignition, 3 red for a sorcery. Target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to each other creature and each opponent. Once your commander's power is really big, a little bit later in the game, once you have your Claws of Valakut, your Black Blade Reforged, something like that on your commander, basically like 20 or 30 power, however many it's going to be, then you use your Chandra's Ignition, hopefully blowing up the whole table. It's very possible to get it in this deck with how many pluses we have to our commander. Just keep in mind that this also is going to kill your board. Obviously it doesn't hit you, but it is going to kill the rest of your creatures, so make sure that you're definitely going to close out the game if you plan on using this, or at least get a lot of advantage from it. Next up, Torbrand, Thane of Red Fell, 1 and triple red for a 2/4 dwarf noble. If a red source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals that much damage +2 instead. Seeing as how a lot of the effects in our deck, like the payoff cards, Valakut, Tunneling GOP, things like that, are dealing little instances of 1 or 2 or 3, having the additional little bump off the Torbrand is really going to help speed up the deck. Last card I'm talking about here, Expedition Map, 1 mana artifact, pay 2, tap it, sack it, search your library for a land card, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. So this is just another way to get our Valakut basically out of the deck if we don't have some of our other options. And like I said, there's also other lands you can go get that help benefit our strategy if you already have your Valakut out. So that's pretty much it for the Zell Mono Red Landfall deck. This one's pretty interesting, not really something that I'm planning on putting together in paper, but it is really cool to see WotC go in this direction for Mono Red. We don't have a lot of landfall commanders. I'd say the only other really viable one would be Morag or whatever his name is, but I have a feeling this archetype in Mono Red is something that they're going to be continue to print a little bit more support for in the future. We already do have quite a bit, but if this is any indication, I can see them definitely printing more stuff like this in the future. But that's all I have for this video. If you guys want to check out the full deck list, I have it down in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, take care.